Imagine, for just a moment, being born into a family where your fate is already decided before you even take your first breath. A family where birthdays are not celebrations but silent countdowns. A family where every son, no matter how healthy, no matter how strong, no matter how loved, faces the same destiny, to die at the exact same age. That age is 21, not earlier, not later, always 21. This is not a fictional horror tale or an urban legend designed to scare children. This is the chilling reality of the Murphy family, a family remembered not for their accomplishments, but for a dark shadow that haunted them for generations. The very idea sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? The thought that an entire bloodline could be chained to such a precise and tragic fate. But when we look at the records, when we listen to the stories that survive through whispers, journals, and word of mouth, we find a pattern that cannot be ignored. The Murphy family was no ordinary family. They were ordinary people, yes, living ordinary lives in their time. They worked, they struggled, they loved, just like anyone else. But what set them apart was this inescapable tragedy, a curse as some called it, that claimed every son at the age of 21. To truly grasp the horror of this, you need to put yourself in their shoes. Imagine growing up as a boy in the Murphy household. You're a child, carefree, running through fields, laughing with your siblings. But as you grow older, the whispers start. The relatives exchange nervous glances, the neighbors mutter behind closed doors, and soon you realize no man in your family ever lives to see his 22nd birthday. That knowledge changes everything. Every year of your life becomes a step closer to the inevitable. At 10 years old, you wonder if you'll even see 20. At 15, you begin counting the years left, and by the time you too turn 20, every sunrise feels heavier. Every heartbeat reminds you of the ticking clock. The fear alone must have been unbearable. Fear can break even the strongest soul. And for the Murphy boys, it was not just fear of death, but the certainty of it. Imagine the family's mothers watching their sons grow, knowing they would lose them. Imagine the fathers, powerless to protect their children. Birthdays would bring dread instead of joy. The 16th, the 18th, the 20th, each a reminder that the end was near. By the time the 21st birthday arrived, it was not a party. It was a funeral waiting to happen. In small towns, rumors spread fast, and the Murphy curse became a story everyone knew. Some pitied the family, some avoided them, afraid that even speaking to them might invite bad luck. Others were fascinated, treating the family's tragedy like a mystery to gossip about. Priests and pastors called it a punishment for sins. Old women muttered about witchcraft. Children dared each other to walk past the Murphy home at night. The family itself was caught in the middle of this storm of judgment, unable to escape either the whispers of neighbors or the fate that followed them. It's worth noting that stories like these often become larger than life. As they are told and retold, details are added, emotions are exaggerated, and myths are born. But even if half of the details were exaggerated, the undeniable fact remains. Generation after generation, Murphy sons did not live beyond 21. The numbers don't lie. Records show death after death, and each one fits the same pattern. Was it coincidence? Could it truly be explained by bad luck? Or was there something more sinister at work? Let's think logically. Could this be a genetic disorder? Some inherited condition that struck only in early adulthood? Perhaps something like a heart disease or a seizure condition that medicine in those times could not diagnose? Or could it have been lifestyle-related, the kind of work they did, the places they lived, the risks they faced? But then again, why exactly 21? Why not 19 or 23? Why always 21? That precision makes it harder to dismiss as coincidence. And this is where the idea of a curse takes root. Humans are creatures of stories. When we see patterns we cannot explain, we create meaning around them. For the Murphys, the deaths were not just personal losses, they became part of a narrative larger than themselves. A curse, a punishment, a dark shadow cast over their bloodline. Every tragedy seemed to prove it further, and the story became so strong that even those who didn't believe in curses struggled to argue against it. So when we say, imagine a family where every son dies at the exact same age, it's not just a line. It's a reality that once existed, shaping every aspect of life for the Murphy family. A reality that blurred the lines between coincidence and curse, between science and superstition. And as we dive deeper into this story, we begin to see just how tragic, how mysterious, and how unforgettable the tale of the Murphy family truly is. Not 20, not 22, but always 21. That number became more than just an age for the Murphy family. It became a symbol of fear, a line that no son could cross. In most families, turning 21 is a milestone. In many cultures, it marks adulthood, freedom, responsibility, and independence. For some, it means finally being old enough to make their own choices, to marry, to inherit family land, or to take charge of family businesses. But in the Murphy household, the age of 21 was not celebrated. It was dreaded. For them, turning 21 wasn't the beginning of a man's life. It was the end. It was the final page of a story already written. And what makes it even more chilling is the precision of it. Every single son died at the same age. Never before, never after. To understand the depth of this mystery, we need to remember what the age of 21 meant in history. In the past, especially in Europe and America, 21 was considered the true age of adulthood. It was the age at which men inherited property, signed contracts, or were considered legally responsible for their own actions. For many, it was the moment of stepping into manhood. Families often planned for years to prepare their sons for this milestone. It was supposed to be a time of hope, of promise, of stepping forward into a future. But for the Murphys, 21 was not a beginning, but an ending. Every son who reached this point seemed to meet the same fate. Imagine how twisted and terrifying that must have felt. The very age that symbolized life and opportunity in the outside world symbolized death and doom inside the Murphy household. Think about how the boys must have lived knowing this. If you were a Murphy son, growing up might have felt almost normal at first, but the shadow of 21 hung over you. At 10, you were just a child, but you probably knew that your older brothers, cousins and uncles had all died at 21. At 15, you'd watch friends dream about the future, but you might secretly wonder if you would even live to see it. At 20, your every day would feel like a countdown. And then came the dreaded birthday. While others in the village celebrated turning 21 with joy, in the Murphy house it was a day of mourning disguised as celebration. Cakes may have been baked, candles may have been lit, but beneath the smiles was fear. Everyone knew that death was near, and death for the Murphy sons was never late. Another strange detail that makes this story so chilling is that the sons didn't always die in the same way. Some died in accidents, crushed under a cart or falling from a horse or drowning in a river. Others died of sudden illnesses, their bodies giving out without warning. A few deaths were so mysterious that even doctors, with the limited knowledge they had at the time, couldn't explain what happened. Yet no matter how different the cause, the outcome was the same. The age was always 21. The variety of deaths only fueled the whispers of a curse. If they had all died of the same illness, people might have believed it was a genetic disease. If they had all died in accidents, people might have blamed bad luck or reckless behavior. But because the deaths were different, people believed something supernatural must be at play. It was as if the hand of fate itself reached down at 21 and ended each son's life, no matter the circumstances. In small towns and villages, people were deeply superstitious. They looked for signs in everything: the way the wind blew, the way animals behaved, the timing of storms, and the Murphy family's tragedy became a cautionary tale. Some parents warned their children not to play with Murphy boys. Some young women were warned not to marry into the Murphy family, fearing that the curse might spread. Priests and ministers preached about sin and punishment. Neighbors whispered that the family had been cursed generations ago, perhaps because one Murphy had broken an oath, stolen something sacred, or angered someone powerful. Whatever the explanation, the community treated the Murphys with a mix of pity and fear. People would bring food after another death, comfort the grieving parents, and then return home to tell their children never to get too close. The Murphy name became a symbol, a reminder of tragedy, mystery, and death at 21. The worst part of this story is not just the deaths, but the way the knowledge of the curse must have shaped the family's lives. Imagine being a father in the Murphy household, knowing that your son will never live to carry your name into the future. Imagine being a mother, rocking your baby boy to sleep, knowing that he will not survive past 21. Imagine being a Murphy son yourself, counting down the years, dreading the day that should have been a celebration. This kind of fear doesn't just kill joy, it kills hope. The family must have lived in constant grief, even before the deaths happened. Every son's life was like a candle burning quickly toward the end, and every parent knew the flame would be blown out at 21. Why 21? That question remains the heart of the mystery. Coincidence seems unlikely. Genetics cannot explain the exact age. Illness doesn't strike with such precision. And yet, every Murphy son, across generations, reached 21 and no further. Some believe the number itself had meaning. In numerology, 21 represents the end of a cycle. In some traditions, it symbolizes both maturity and completion. Could it be that the number had some symbolic weight that tied into the Murphy fate? Or was it simply that people noticed the pattern and the legend of the curse grew around it, reinforcing itself with every new death? Not 20, not 22, but always 21. That single detail is what transforms the Murphy story from a tale of tragedy into one of the most haunting mysteries in history. It is what makes us question coincidence, fate, and the very nature of life and death. And as we move deeper into this story, we will see how the world reacted to the Murphy curse, how historians, neighbors, and future generations tried to make sense of this chilling tale. This is not fiction. This is not a bedtime story told to frighten children. This is not a legend passed down with exaggerations for entertainment. What you are hearing now is a real story. The Murphy family truly existed, and the pattern of their tragedy is documented, remembered, and whispered about even to this day. Skeptics may argue. Some will say, surely this is just a myth. Others will claim it was nothing more than coincidence, or that the story has been blown out of proportion with time. And yes, it is natural to doubt. We live in a world where facts matter, and legends often mix truth with imagination. But the heart of the Murphy family story, that their sons died at 21, is no invention. It is a reality that haunted a real family, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow and unanswered questions, the weight of reality. When we hear ghost stories or legends of curses, we can shrug them off because we know they belong to the world of imagination. But when we hear that a real family suffered, that real parents buried their sons, that real communities watched the pattern unfold, it becomes much heavier. It is no longer entertainment, it is history. The Murphy family's suffering was not a tale for campfires. It was lived experience. It was blood and bone, tears and coffins. Imagine the graveyards. Row after row, headstones bearing the same surname, each inscription ending with the same number. 21. A chilling symmetry carved in stone. You could walk through the cemetery and see the curse for yourself written on the graves, tracing the family records. Historians who studied the Murphy family found patterns in parish records, death certificates, and family documents. These were not vague rumors. They were dates and names inked into official books. Sons born, sons buried, always around the same age. Some researchers even noted how the deaths shocked boring towns. When news spread that yet another Murphy boy had died at 21, it reinforced the belief that this was no ordinary tragedy. Clergymen mentioned the family in sermons. Writers jotted down notes in journals. The story lived on because it had a foundation in truth, rejecting the idea of coincidence. Of course, some argue it was coincidence. After all, strange coincidences happen in history. Lightning has struck the same man more than once. People have been born and died on the same date, across generations. But what makes the Murphy story so haunting is the precision. Not 20, not 22, always 21. When something repeats with such accuracy, it no longer feels like random chance. It feels like a design, a pattern, or as many believed, a curse. Impact on the family's reputation. For the Murphy family, reality was harsher than any legend. They had to live with the whispers, the stares, the fear that followed them everywhere. Children from other families were told not to play with Murphy boys. Young women were told not to marry Murphy men, for fear they'd soon be widows. Employers hesitated to hire Murphy sons, thinking, why invest in a worker who won't live past 21? Their reputation became a prison. Even if the curse wasn't real, the weight of belief made it real in every way that mattered. They were isolated, pitied, feared. Their name, once just another surname, became a symbol of doom, rejecting the idea of coincidence. Of course, some argue it was coincidence. After all, strange coincidences happen in history. Lightning has struck the same man more than once. People have been born and died on the same date, across generations. But what makes the Murphy story so haunting is the precision. Not 20, not 22, always 21. When something repeats with such accuracy, it no longer feels like random chance. It feels like a design, a pattern, or as many belie, ved, a curse. Impact on the family's reputation. For the Murphy family, reality was harsher than any legend. They had to live with the whispers, the stares, the fear that followed them everywhere. Impact on the family's reputation. For the Murphy family, reality was harsher than any legend. They had to live with the whispers, the stares, the fear that followed them everywhere. Children from other families were told not to play with Murphy boys. Young women were told not to marry Murphy men, for fear they'd soon be widows. Employers hesitated to hire Murphy sons, thinking, why invest in a worker who won't live past 21? Their reputation became a prison. Even if the curse wasn't real, the weight of belief made it real in every way that mattered. They were isolated, pitied, feared. Their name, once just another surname, became a symbol of doom, supernatural interpretations. This reality also fueled supernatural interpretations. Some said the Murphys were cursed because an ancestor had made a deal with the devil. Others claimed a witch had marked their bloodline. Folklore surrounding the family grew richer with every death, as people tried to explain what science could not. In Irish tradition, where the Murphy name has strong roots, stories of banshees, spirits that wail before a death, were common. Some locals swore they heard banshee cries near Murphy homes, a sign that another son was about to die. Whether true or not, these stories show how deeply the tragedy sank into the imagination of the people, the difference between legend and reality. But here lies the most important part. Even if legends and rumors grew around the Murphy name, the reality was still tragic. Even if the supernatural explanations were only myths, the deaths were real. The families still buried their sons. The mothers still wept. The curse may have been a story, but the grief was not. Why this story endures. So why does this story still matter today? Why do we continue to talk about the Murphy family after so many years? Because it touches something universal, the idea of fate, the fear of death, the possibility of curses. We see ourselves in their story, our hopes, our fears, our desire to find meaning in tragedy, and it endures because the story resists explanation. We cannot dismiss it as coincidence, yet we cannot prove it as supernatural. It exists in that unsettling middle ground where history and mystery collide, philosophical reflection. Think about it. If you were a Murphy son, would you believe in the curse? Would you accept your fate and live recklessly knowing the end is near? Or would you fight against it, hoping you might be the one to break the cycle? And if you were a parent, would you even dare to hope that your boy might live past 21? Or would you prepare his coffin the day he was born? The reality of the Murphy family forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about destiny, free will, and the unknown forces that may shape our lives. This is not fiction. This is not a legend. This is the real-life story of the Murphy family, a story etched in graves, remembered in whispers, and carried forward through generations. Their sons did not live to see 22. They lived under a shadow, and they died at 21. And whether you believe it was coincidence, genetics, or a curse, one fact remains undeniable. The Murphy family's tragedy is one of the darkest true stories ever told. Opening, the big question. Every great mystery begins with a question. For the Murphy family, the question was simple but terrifying. Why? Why did their sons never live beyond 21? Why did the same tragedy strike, generation after generation? Was it pure fate, a cruel coincidence written into the fabric of their lives? Or was there something darker at play? A curse, a punishment, or even a force beyond human understanding? This question has haunted not just the Murphy family, but everyone who has heard their story, and the reason it continues to haunt us is because it defies clear explanation. Coincidence theory. Let us first consider the idea of coincidence. Statistically speaking, strange coincidences do happen in the world. People are struck by lightning more than once. Entire families die in accidents that seem impossible to predict. Some individuals are born and die on the exact same date. Life can be random, and randomness often looks like design when repeated enough times. But in the case of the Murphys, the repetition feels too sharp, too precise. If it happened once, maybe, twice perhaps, but when every son, across multiple generations, dies at the same age, the word coincidence begins to feel like a weak explanation, fate or destiny theory. Another explanation is fate. Some cultures believe that the length of your life is predetermined, written into destiny before you are born. In this view, the Murphy family's tragedy was simply their lot in life, a cruel fate from which there was no escape. To them, 21 was not just an age, but the endpoint marked on their life's calendar. But if we accept fate, then we must ask, why only the Murphy sons? Why not daughters? Why not cousins or distant relatives? Why was this curse or destiny so selective? Fate may explain inevitability, but it doesn't explain precision. Darker explanations, Q. And so, inevitably, we arrive at the darker explanations. Many in the Murphys community believed their family was cursed. They whispered of an ancestor who had done something unforgivable, perhaps betrayed a friend, broken an oath, or stolen from someone powerful. Curses, according to folklore, cling to bloodlines. They follow generation after generation, exacting punishment long after the original sin has been forgotten. If this was true, then the deaths of the Murphy sons were not random at all. They were part of a design, a punishment carried out with exact precision, 21 years of life and no more. Religious explanations. Others turned to religion. Some priests believed the Murphys were paying for the sins of their fathers. In the Bible, it is said that the sins of one generation can be visited upon the next. Perhaps the Murphys were a living example of this passage. Others believed the family was cursed by their lack of faith or by dabbling in something forbidden. Religious interpretations gave people a framework to explain the tragedy, even if it provided little comfort to the family themselves. The fear in the community. The ongoing mystery surrounding the Murphy family didn't just affect them. It cast a shadow over their entire community. Neighbors wondered if the curse could spread. Parents warned their children to keep away. Every new Murphy son's birth was met not with celebration, but with dread. People watched with nervous curiosity, waiting to see if the cycle would repeat again. And it always did. This collective fear fueled the story, keeping it alive long after the family itself had passed. Even today, the Murphy family's tale is told not just as a tragedy, but as a warning of what can happen when fate or something darker takes control of a bloodline. Was it fate? Was it coincidence? Or was it something much darker? We may never know the truth. But what makes the Murphy story unforgettable is precisely this question. It is the mystery itself, the fact that it defies explanation, that ensures their story lives on, leaving each of us to wrestle with the haunting possibilities. Ordinary beginnings. What makes the Murphy story even more heartbreaking is that in many ways they were just like everyone else. The Murphys were not born into wealth or nobility. They were an ordinary family, living ordinary lives. They worked the land, tended animals, went to church, and raised their children with the same hopes as any other family. They laughed, they loved, they struggled, just like everyone else. And yet, woven into this ordinary life was something extraordinary, a tragedy that would define them for generations. The early generations. The earliest Murphys recorded were farmers. They lived close to the land, depending on it for survival. Their days were filled with labor, and their evenings with family. Like many families of their time, survival wasn't guaranteed. Illness, famine, and war were always near, and yet, for the Murphys, survival carried an additional threat, the curse of 21. Every family faces hardship. But for the Murphys, hardship became destiny. No matter how hard they worked, no matter how much they prayed, no matter how much they loved their sons, the same tragedy struck again and again, how they tried to resist. Families often try to escape their circumstances. Some Murphys moved away, hoping to break the curse by leaving their homeland. Others turned to healers, doctors, or priests. Some even tried changing their names, believing that abandoning the Murphy surname might protect their children. But none of it worked. The curse, or the fate, followed them wherever they went. The daughters of the family. Interestingly, the Murphy daughters did not face the same fate. They grew, married, and lived ordinary lifespans. Some even lived into old age. This made the tragedy feel even sharper. As though the curse deliberately targeted the sons, the heirs, the carriers of the family name. For parents, this contrast was devastating. To watch their daughters grow while their sons were destined to die must have felt like an unbearable cruelty. Ordinary life, overshadowed by fear. Outwardly, the Murphys lived like their neighbors. They plowed fields, attended weddings, sang songs at festivals. But beneath the surface, fear controlled everything. Birthdays were not joyful. Milestones like turning 21 brought only dread. Life was lived under a shadow, and no amount of ordinary routine could erase it. And that is what makes their story so tragic. The Murphy family lived a life just like anyone else, but their lives were stolen from them by something no one could explain. They wanted to be ordinary. They wanted to farm, to laugh, to live. But they were destined to be remembered not for their lives, but for their deaths, the hidden shadow. Behind every smile in the Murphy household, behind every laugh, behind every attempt at normalcy, there was a shadow that followed them from cradle to coffin. Outsiders might have seen a happy family, but those who lived inside those walls knew the truth. They were living under a curse, or at least under the belief of one. And that belief shaped everything they did, how fear shapes childhood. Imagine being a child in the Murphy family. You hear stories of uncles, cousins, and brothers who never made it past 21. You see your parents grow sad when your birthday comes closer each year. Even if no one speaks about it directly, you feel it. The fear seeps into you. You start to wonder if you are doomed too. Childhood, which should be carefree, becomes heavy with unspoken dread. Adolescence, under a curse. As the boys grew into their teenage years, the shadow only grew darker. Friends dreamed of the future, of jobs, marriages, travels. But for Murphy boys, the future was a forbidden word. Why dream of 30 when you may not see 22? Why plan for a family when you are destined not to live long enough to raise one? This sense of hopelessness shaped their lives, limiting their choices before they even had the chance to make them. Parents and the shadow. For the parents, the shadow was even heavier. Every moment with their sons was bittersweet. They loved them fiercely, but every smile was tinged with sorrow, every embrace a little tighter because they knew it would not last. Imagine raising a child while knowing deep down that you would bury him at 21. No parent should face that fate. And yet the Murphys faced it over and over again. The shadow in the community. The shadow didn't stop at the Murphy home. It stretched into the community as well. Neighbors avoided them. Children whispered cruel jokes. People stared weeboo. Another Murphy funeral passed through the town. Some pitied them, some feared them, but none treated them as ordinary. The curse defined them in the eyes of everyone. And so, behind every smile, every laugh, every attempt at normal life, there was always that shadow. The Murphy family tried to live like everyone else, but fate, or curse, never allowed them to. Their tragedy was not just in their deaths, but in the way the shadow stole even the joy of living. The concept of time as a curse. For most families, birthdays are moments of joy. Balloons, laughter, gifts, and the promise of another year of life. But for the Murphy family, birthdays were something far darker. Every candle on a cake wasn't a celebration, it was a warning. Every new year wasn't a step forward, but a step closer to the inevitable. Their sons didn't just grow up, they counted down. To live in the Murphy household was to live with a clock constantly ticking in the background, a clock that struck for every son at the age of 21, childhood innocence. In childhood, the Murphy boys were spared from the full weight of the curse. As little boys, they ran barefoot through fields, climbed trees, splashed in rivers, and laughed under the sun. To them, the world was as wide and wonderful as it is to any child. But even in childhood, shadows crept in. Their mothers clutched them tighter. Their fathers watched them with sadness in their eyes. And while the boys played, their parents quietly feared how quickly those years would vanish. Adolescence, the turning point. But then came adolescence. At 13 or 14, whispers turned to conversations. The boys began to overhear stories of their uncles, their cousins, their brothers before them. They began to notice the funerals, the mourning, the empty chairs at family gatherings, and slowly it dawned on them. They were not like other boys. Their future was already marked. Imagine being a teenager and realizing you will never grow old, that you will never see 30, that you may not even live to see your own children. While others dreamed of building futures, the Murphy boys felt their futures shrinking, the weight of the 18th birthday. Turning 18 is usually a time of excitement. It marks adulthood, independence, the beginning of new chapters. But for a Murphy boy, 18 was not the start of freedom. It was the beginning of the countdown's final stretch. 3 years, 3 short years until the curse claimed them. Families held their breath during these years. Every illness, every accident, every sleepless night felt like a step toward doom. Parents prayed desperately, but prayers never seemed to change the story. The 20th birthday, the final year. Then came 20. A normal young man at 20 is filled with energy and ambition, but a Murphy son at 20 lived with dread. Every day became heavier, every sunrise a reminder that time was running out. By then, the family almost treated the young man as though he were already gone, cherishing every moment, fearing every silence. And then, 21 arrived. For others, it is a milestone of adulthood. For the Murphys, it was the end. Every year was a countdown. Every birthday was a ticking clock. And for the Murphy sons, the sound of that clock grew louder with every passing year until finally, it struck 21, and silence followed. The day arrives. The 21st birthday was unlike any other in the Murphy family. While the rest of the world celebrated 21 as a doorway to adulthood, the freedom to marry, to drink, to live independently, for the Murphy family, it was the doorway to death. Imagine the tension in that household. The day before, the family sits in silence. No one sleeps. The birthday boy, now a young man, feels the weight of generations pressing down on him. He knows the story. He knows his fate. And yet, somewhere in his heart, he clings to the hope. Maybe I will be the one to survive. Maybe the curse will end with me. The ritual of dread. On that morning, the family doesn't prepare balloons or cake. Instead, they prepare themselves for mourning. Mothers pray on their knees. Fathers sit in silence, gripping their rosaries or staring into the distance. Sisters weep quietly, unable to face the thought of losing yet another brother. And the birthday boy himself? He often spends the day in quiet reflection, walking familiar paths, writing in journals, or sitting with family. Some are said to have begged the heavens for mercy. Others accepted their fate with calm resignation, the mysterious pattern of deaths. What made the story more chilling was the way the deaths occurred. Some Murphy sons died in accidents, falling from horses, drowning, being struck by falling trees. Others died of sudden illnesses, fevers, seizures, unexplained collapses, and in some cases, death came in their sleep without warning. But the pattern was always the same. No matter the cause, no Murphy son lived past 21, the community watches. The 21st birthday wasn't just a private family matter. By then, the community was watching too. Neighbors whispered, waiting to hear the news, and when the inevitable death occurred, the whispers turned into gasps of awe and fear. The curse continues. They see the power of story. What happens when tragedy repeats itself? It becomes more than memory. It becomes legend, and that is exactly what happened with the Murphy family. Even after the deaths, even after the coffins were buried and the family tried to move on, the stories lived on. In villages and towns, people whispered. At markets, in taverns, in churches, the name Murphy carried a shiver. Everyone had heard about the family where no son lived past 21, how stories spread. In an age without newspapers or social media, stories spread by word of mouth, and the Murphy curse spread like wildfire. Travelers carried it from one town to the next. Priests used it as a cautionary tale in sermons. Parents frightened their children with it. Obey, or you'll end up like the Murphy boys. The more the story was told, the more it grew. Some said the deaths were caused by demons. Others claimed a deal with the devil gone wrong. Still others insisted the family was haunted by the spirit of a wronged ancestor. Each telling added new layers to the legend, the role of fear and fascination. Why did people keep whispering about it? Because human beings are fascinated by fear. We cannot look away from the things that terrify us. The Murphy curse was more than a tragedy. It was entertainment, gossip, even a kind of folklore that gave people chills around the firelight, the effect on the surviving family. But for the surviving Murphys, these whispers were salt in the wound. Imagine walking through town and hearing your family's pain used as gossip. Imagine children chanting about your curse. The stories kept the wounds open, generation after generation. And yet, the whispers also ensured that the family's tragedy was never forgotten. Long after the last Murphy son was buried, the curse lived on in stories. Stories whispered in villages and towns kept the curse alive. They turned a family's private grief into public legend. And today, those whispers have echoed across centuries, carrying the Murphy curse into our own time. A tale that still chills, still fascinates, and still leaves us wondering, was it coincidence, fate, or something darker? The tale crosses villages. For years, the Murphy curse lived in whispers within local villages, but legends are like rivers. They flow, carrying stories far beyond their source. Slowly, the tale of the Murphy family began to escape the narrow lanes of their hometown. Travelers passing through the region would stop at inns or markets, and inevitably someone would bring up the Murphys. Did you hear about the family where every son dies at 21? These travelers carried the story with them, and by the time they reached the next town, the legend had already taken root. Merchants and storytellers. Merchants played a key role. They didn't just trade goods, they traded stories. Sitting around fires after long days on the road, merchants told and retold the curse of the Murphys. They added dramatic details, painting vivid pictures of mothers weeping, of gravestones marked with the same number, 21. Storytellers too took interest. In an age where oral tradition was the main form of entertainment, such a chilling tale was gold. Some embellished it with ghostly figures, others with banshee cries. What mattered was not accuracy, but the shiver it sent down spines, across borders. Eventually, the tale spread beyond its birthplace. Travelers from other countries heard it, took it home and repeated it in their own villages. Soon, the Murphy curse was no longer just an Irish story. It became a European legend. In taverns across the continent, drinkers whispered of the doomed family, cursed to lose every son at 21. Even sailors carried the story overseas. Some records suggest the Murphy curse was told in ports far from Ireland, becoming part of the broader folklore of mysterious deaths and family curses. Why the story traveled so well? But why did this particular story travel so far? Because it contained the elements of a perfect legend. Repetition. They say, aim fate. Again and again. Tragedy. A family robbed of hope. Mystery. No explanation that satisfied everyone. Fear. The suggestion that curses could be real. It was a story people couldn't forget, and once they heard it, they couldn't help but share it. The Murphy curse no longer belonged only to the family. It no longer belonged even to their village. It had become a traveling legend carried by merchants, sailors and storytellers, echoing across borders, taking root wherever fear and fascination lived. The search for answers. As the Murphy story spread, it caught the attention not just of common folk but of priests, scholars and skeptics. People wanted answers. How could such a thing happen? Was it divine punishment, a scientific phenomenon, or just cruel coincidence? The religious explanation. Priests were among the first to weigh in. Many declared the curse a punishment from God. Perhaps the Murphys had committed some ancient sin, and their bloodline was paying the price. Others suggested demonic influence, that the family was under the grip of dark forces beyond human understanding. Sermons warned people not to stray from faith, using the Murphy family as an example of what happens when one turns from God's light. Whether fair or not, the Murphys became a tool for moral lessons, the skeptical voice. But not everyone agreed. Some skeptics argued it was nothing but coincidence. After all, they said, death does not discriminate. Many young men die at 21, in war, in accidents, in sickness. It is only human imagination that stitches together a pattern. For these skeptics, the curse was nothing more than a story built on grief and fear, the scientific lens. Later, as science progressed, new theories emerged. Doctors and early geneticists began to wonder, could the Murphys have suffered from a hereditary illness? Some conditions, such as heart defects, epilepsy, or undiagnosed genetic disorders, can strike young men suddenly, often in their late teens or early 20s. Though no medical records survived to confirm such theories, they offered a possible rational explanation. Perhaps the Murphy curse was not supernatural at all, but a tragic roll of the genetic dice, the tension between faith and science. This debate, faith versus science, curse versus coincidence, only fueled the story's longevity. Believers pointed to the precision of the genesis. Deaths, always 21, never later. Skeptics countered with probability and logic. Each side strengthened the legend, for in arguing about it, they ensured it was never forgotten. Was it God's punishment? Was it a hereditary disease? Or was it nothing but coincidence wrapped in superstition? The truth remains elusive, but the very search for answers gave the Murphy curse a deeper place in history. A puzzle no one could solve, a tragedy no one could forget. The endless grief. At the heart of the Murphy curse lies not mystery, not legend, but grief. Real mothers wept, real fathers dug graves for their sons, and the most haunting truth of all is that the pattern never broke, the mother's perspective. For the mothers, the curse was unbearable. Imagine carrying a child for 9 months, nurturing him through childhood, watching him laugh and grow, all while knowing deep inside that his life would end at 21. Every smile was bittersweet. Every milestone, his first word, his first step, his first day of school, carried the shadow of an early end. And when the day finally came, it was the mother's tears that watered the soil above his grave, the father's burden. For the fathers, the curse was a different kind of torment. In those times, men were seen as protectors. But how do you protect your son from fate itself? How do you shield him from a curse that kills no matter what you do? Many Murphy fathers carried silent guilt, believing they had failed their sons. Some even believed the curse was their fault, that their bloodline carried the sin that doomed their children. And so, with heavy hearts, they became grave diggers for their own families, the siblings left behind. And what of the brothers and sisters left behind? They grew up knowing that every birthday brought them closer to loss. Siblings learned not to dream of futures together because futures never lasted. Brothers buried brothers, sisters mourned again and again. The Murphy household was not filled with laughter, but with silence, with waiting, with grief rehearsed and grief repeated. The unbroken pattern. What makes the story unbearable is that it never ended differently. The pattern never broke. No son escaped, no miracle came. Every generation repeated the tragedy. Imagine the despair, to see hope snuffed out again and again until hope itself became impossible. That is why the Murphy story still echoes today, because it is not just about mystery, but about the unbearable weight of repeating grief. Mothers wept, fathers buried sons, siblings mourned, and the pattern never broke. That is the legacy of the Murphy family, not just a curse, but a sorrow that no generation could escape. Suspicion grows. The Murphy family did not suffer alone. Around them stood a community. Neighbors, shopkeepers, farmers, priests, children. At first the village grieved alongside them, mourning each young death. But as the pattern repeated, something shifted. People began to whisper, to fear, to avoid. Soon the Murphy family was no longer just a grieving household. They were a warning, fear of contagion. Villagers believed curses could spread like sickness. If you stood too close, if you shared too much, if you allowed the doomed family into your circle, perhaps their fate would follow you. And so doors closed. Invitations stopped coming. Children were told not to play with Murphy sons. The Murphys became isolated, living in the same village, but apart from it. Loneliness piled on top of grief, the stigma of death. Superstition made matters worse. Death itself was seen as a spiritual stain. To lose one child was tragedy. To lose many was a mark of darkness. Some whispered the Murphys had angered God. Others thought the devil walked among them, and still others believed the family had invited their curse through forbidden practices. No matter the theory, one thing was clear. The Murphys were no longer trusted. Stories in the market. Marketplaces became breeding grounds for stories. Did you hear? Another Murphy boy is sick. He won't see his next birthday. Such rumors spread before death even came, as if the community expected it. And when death did arrive, they nodded knowingly. Of course, it was bound to happen. The family's pain became gossip. Their private grief became public spectacle. The price of isolation. The Murphys could not escape the curse, but isolation made it heavier. With every son buried, they were left more alone. Few friends visited. Few neighbors offered comfort. Fear built walls higher than grief ever could. Imagine standing in our own home, watching neighbors cross the street rather than pass your gate. Imagine children pointing fingers and calling you the cursed family. Imagine needing help during harvest, but no one volunteering because your land was considered tainted. That was the Murphys' reality. The curse did not only kill sons, it killed trust. It killed friendship. It killed community. And in the end, the Murphys were left with grief inside their walls and fear outside them. The darkest theory. Among all the explanations whispered about the Murphy family, none was darker, none more terrifying than this, that their ancestors had made a deal with the devil. This rumor spread like wildfire, for it explained everything in one chilling stroke. A family cursed, sons doomed, a pattern of death, all could be traced to a single, sinful bargain, the origin of the rumor. No one knows exactly when the rumor began. Some said an old Murphy ancestor had prayed for wealth or land and pledged his descendants in return. Others claimed a Murphy sailor had begged the devil for safe passage across a storm, swearing his bloodline would pay. Still others believed a Murphy farmer, desperate for harvest, called upon forbidden powers. The details varied, but the theme remained the same. A pact had been made, and the price was blood. Why the rumor stuck? It was easy to believe, because it explained the inexplicable. Coincidences could not be so precise, diseases did not strike so evenly. But a deal with the devil, that carried the cold weight of logic in a superstitious age. The rumor stuck because it made sense, not scientifically but spiritually. The devil's signature. People began pointing to details as proof. The exact age of 21 was said to be part of the contract, the devil's number for the end of youth and the beginning of manhood. Some swore they saw shadows around Murphy graves, others claimed storms always followed a Murphy funeral. Whether true or imagined, such signs fueled belief. The curse was no longer just tragedy, it was punishment for a bargain struck generations before. The Murphys respond. For the family, the rumor was a second curse. To lose sons was unbearable. To be accused of devil worship made it worse. Some Murphy parents swore publicly they had never trafficked with dark forces. Others stayed silent. Perhaps no. Nothing they said could change the minds of those who wanted to believe the worst. Silence, too, was dangerous, for silence was taken as admission. The devil's grip on the legend. Even after centuries, this theory still haunts the Murphy curse. Whenever their story is told, the devil's shadow lingers over it. Was the family doomed by random chance, by illness, by fate? Or had they, long ago, signed away their sons for a moment of power? The legend offers no answer, only fear. The devil never needed to appear in person. His presence was enough, woven into whispers, carried by rumor, believed by many. And in the eyes of their community, the Murphy family's grief was not just misfortune, it was judgment. Childhood, under a curse. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the Murphy story lies not in the graves, but in the lives cut short. What was it like to grow up a Murphy son, knowing death waited at 21? From childhood they lived under a shadow. Birthdays were not simply celebrations, they were countdowns. At age 10 you had 11 years left, at 15, 6 years. At 20, only 1 year remained, the fear of adulthood. Adolescence is normally a time of freedom, exploration and dreams, but for Murphy boys, it was a time of dread. They knew that reaching manhood meant reaching death. Some grew reckless, living fast, drinking hard, fighting, as if trying to taste everything before the inevitable end. Others grew cautious, avoiding risks, hoping to slip past the curse quietly. Neither approach worked. At 21, death came regardless. The pressure of legacy. Every Murphy son carried not only his own fate, but the weight of his family's history. Brothers before him had died. He knew he would too. Parents prayed, begged, and tried to protect him. But nothing, no prayer, no medicine, no charm, could change what was coming. It was not just life they carried, it was doom. Dreams denied. Imagine the dreams these young men must have had. To marry, to raise children, to work the land, to see their parents grow old, none of it possible. Every relationship was shadowed by sorrow. Girls who courted Murphy boys did so knowing they would be widows by 21. Employers hesitated to hire them. Friendships were strained by the looming certainty of death. The sons lived, but they did not truly get to live. The last year. The final year was the cruelest. Turning 21 was not celebration, but a death sentence. Every day carried the question, is today the day? Some Murphy sons grew bitter, cursing the fate that stole their future. Others grew silent, resigned to what they believed they could not escape. And when the end came, sudden illness, accident, unexplained collapse, it was not surprise, but grim expectation fulfilled, the human side of the legend. When we talk of the Murphy curse, it is easy to speak of patterns and rumors, of curses and deals with the devil. But at its core, it was about young men robbed of life, flesh and blood, sons with names, with laughter, with hopes. They were not symbols, they were people, and every time one of them died, the legend grew, but a life was lost. The Murphy sons never lived to see grey hair or grandchildren. They never saw old age. They lived under a shadow and died at its edge, and in their short, tragic lives, they carried the burden of a curse that would define their family for generations. A silent burden. The Murphy curse did not only kill the body, it haunted the mind. Imagine being born into a family where death had a schedule. A family where every conversation, every birthday, every whispered prayer carried one unshakable truth. 21 was the end. This knowledge shaped every Murphy son's mind and every Murphy parent's heart. It was not only a tragedy of death, it was a tragedy of living under death. The parents' fear. For Murphy parents, joy and sorrow were mixed from the very first day. The moment a son was born, tears of happiness were shadowed by tears of dread. How do you raise a child when you believe he will not live beyond 21? Parents became overprotective. Some refused to let their sons wander far, afraid of accidents. Others showered them with love, trying to fill 2 lifetimes into one short span. But no amount of love could stop the inevitable. And when each son died, the parents were forced to relive the same nightmare, again and again, the son's anxiety. For the boys, the curse was a clock ticking in their heads. They grew up hearing the stories. Your brothers died at 21, your uncles died at 21, you will too. At first it was background noise, but as birthdays passed, the truth grew louder. At 15 they began to feel it. At 18 the dread became unbearable. At 20 every sunrise was a reminder of how close the end was. Some boys lived recklessly, trying to squeeze every joy from their short lives. Others fell into despair, losing hope long before death arrived. Either way, the curse shaped their very identity, the curse as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Some modern thinkers believe the Murphy curse may have been psychological as much as supernatural. If you believe with all your heart that you will die at a certain age, the body itself may begin to break down under stress. Anxiety weakens the immune system. Fear can cause fatal mistakes. A son who expects to die may unconsciously bring about his own death. In this way, the curse was not just mystical, it was mental, the weight on survivors. Even those who lived past the doomed age, distant cousins, daughters, extended family, carried the weight. Their identities were tied to the legend. They could not escape the shadow of death. A Murphy child was never just a child. A Murphy mother was never just a mother. They were characters in a tragic play, unable to rewrite their script. The curse may have been written in fate, or it may have been written in the human mind. But either way, its power was undeniable. Death did not just arrive at 21. It lived with the Murphys every single day before that. A legacy of sorrow. The Murphy curse did not die with one generation. It echoed, repeating through decades. Grandparents lost sons, parents lost sons, and then surviving brothers grew up to lose their own sons. It was not a single tragedy. It was a chain. Each generation bore the same weight, the same dread, the same grief, the first generation. In the earliest records, the curse seemed like a cruel coincidence. 1 or 2 deaths explained away as illness. But when the pattern repeated, brother after brother, cousin after cousin, whispers began. This is not natural. Something is wrong with the Murphy bloodline. The first generation laid the foundation of the legend. By their graves, the curse took root. The second generation. By the time the second generation came of age, the curse was already feared. Children grew up with warnings. You are a Murphy boy. Be careful. Pray hard. Stay away from danger. Yet despite all efforts, death still came at 21. This generation cemented the curse as truth. Villagers could no longer call it coincidence. Too many names, too many coffins, too many sons gone too soon. The third generation. By the third generation, the curse was destiny. Families did not ask if, but when. Parents named their sons with trembling hands. Mothers kissed babies with broken hearts, and boys grew up already knowing the story of their fate. This generation turned the curse into folklore. They told stories of banshees, devils, and witches. They sought priests, doctors, and healers, but nothing changed. The burden of generational memory. Each death was not just one tragedy, it was all tragedies combined. A Murphy funeral was not only for the son buried that day, it was for every son before him. Generational grief stacked like stones, heavier with each passing year. And through these generations, the curse lived on, not just as death but as memory. Children inherited the sorrow of their fathers. Grandchildren inherited the fear of their grandparents. The curse was not only in blood, it was in memory, in culture, in the story itself. Generations passed, graves filled, legends deepened, and the Murphy name became more than a family. It became a warning carved across time, from story to record. Legends fade when they lack proof, but the Murphy curse endured because it was not only spoken in whispers, it was written in ink. Historical records, journals, parish logs, and even early newspaper articles preserved the strange fate of the family. The story transformed from rumor into documentation, and once written, it could never be erased. Parish records. In old church books, priests carefully recorded births, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. When historians studied Murphy records, they saw the chilling pattern: sons baptized in 1 year, buried 21 years later. The handwriting of priests preserved in faded ink gave the curse credibility. These were not tales, they were facts on paper, death certificates and causes. What made the record stranger was the variety of deaths. Some boys died of sickness, some in accidents, some with no clear cause at all. Doctors wrote unknown on certificates, leaving questions unanswered. This variety only strengthened the curse's mystery. If all had died of the same illness, science might explain it. But the randomness suggested something greater, something darker. Newspaper mentions. By the 19th century, local newspapers began mentioning the Murphy tragedies. Short articles about yet another young Murphy lad lost at 21 reached readers beyond the village. Soon the curse was no longer local. It became regional, even national gossip. Each article added weight. The curse was no longer just folklore. It was news, journals and diaries. Private writings from neighbors and priests also told of the curse. Some expressed pity, others fear. One journal entry described the sound of wailing heard the night before a Murphy son's death, believed to be the cry of the banshee. These personal accounts, passed through time, made the story deeply human. The historian's dilemma. Modern historians face a dilemma. On one hand, the records confirm the deaths. The pattern is undeniable. On the other hand, explanations remain elusive. Was it genetic? Was it coincidence? Or was it something unexplainable? Documentation gives the curse credibility, but it does not give answers. The Murphy curse lives on not only in story but in history. Written records, official documents, and personal accounts keep the tragedy alive. It is not only legend, it is documented reality, one of the strangest and saddest true stories ever told. A modern lens. When people hear of the Murphy curse today, they immediately ask, could there be a scientific explanation? In an age of genetics, medicine, and psychology, we instinctively search for natural causes rather than supernatural ones. Was it a disease running in the family? Was it a hereditary condition? Or could science prove what folklore only guessed? Possible genetic disorders. Doctors looking back at historical cases suggest that the Murphy sons may have suffered from an inherited genetic disorder. Some conditions cause sudden death in young adults, often around the same age. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, HCM, a heart condition that can strike suddenly in the late teens or early 20s. Many young athletes have collapsed unexpectedly from this silent killer. Long QT syndrome, a disorder of the heart's electrical system, leading to sudden cardiac arrest. Symptoms often appear around adolescence or early adulthood. Hemophilia. Though less age-specific, this condition could have caused early death if untreated. If the Murphys carried such a condition, it might explain why the sons never lived past 21. Environmental factors. Others argue that the family may have lived in an environment that contributed to early deaths. Contaminated water, exposure to toxins, or poor nutrition could have weakened them. But why then, always at 21? That age-specific pattern makes environmental causes less convincing. Psychological death, stress and fear. Another theory points to the mind. If Murphy boys were raised to believe they would die at 21, the stress alone could have weakened their bodies. Chronic anxiety can cause heart problems, weakened immunity, and even accidents born from distraction or recklessness. In this sense, belief itself may have killed them, a tragic case of prophecy becoming reality, limitations of science. Yet even with all the theories, no explanation fully satisfies. Genetics may explain some cases, but not all. Environment may have played a role, but not with such precision. Psychology may contribute, but can fear alone stop a healthy heart at 21? Science provides clues, but not certainty. The curse remains beyond full explanation. Perhaps medicine can shed light, but in the shadows of history, the mystery remains unsolved. Living in a fishbowl. The Murphy family did not live in isolation. They lived in communities, villages, towns, parishes, surrounded by neighbors who watched, whispered, and judged. Their curse was not only a private sorrow, it was public spectacle, fear of association. Neighbors often kept their distance. Children were warned, don't get too close to the Murphy boys. Families feared marrying into them. Employers hesitated to hire them, believing their labor would be short-lived. Even friendships grew rare, for who would want to invest in a bond destined to end so soon? The Murphys became outsiders in their own towns, cursed not only by fate, but by the coldness of society. Whispers and superstitions. In every tavern, in every market, the curse was discussed. People speculated endlessly. It must be punishment from God. No, a witch marked their bloodline. Maybe the Murphys angered the fairies of the old country. These whispers stripped the family of dignity. They were no longer just people. They were legends, walking reminders of something unnatural, pity and sympathy. Not all reactions were cruel. Some neighbors pitied them deeply. Mothers wept for Murphy mothers. Fathers prayed for Murphy fathers. At funerals, communities came together in mourning. Yet even sympathy had a sharp edge. It reminded the Murphys daily of their difference. Isolation as a defense. Over time, many Murphy families withdrew. They stopped attending large gatherings. They avoided questions. Some even changed their surnames to escape the stigma. To live as a Murphy was to live under a microscope, your life story written for you before you had a chance to live it. The curse was not only in the blood, it was in the eyes of those around them. Society, with its fear and superstition, became part of the punishment. The Murphys carried not only death at 21, but the weight of a community that saw them as doomed. Faith against fear. In times of unexplainable tragedy, people turned to faith. For the Murphy family and those who knew them, religion became both a comfort and a source of explanation. If science could not explain the curse, perhaps the divine, or the demonic, could. Catholic perspective. Being of Irish roots, many Murphys were devout Catholics. Priests offered mass for the souls of the departed sons. Families prayed novenas, lit candles, begged saints for intercession. Some priests argued the curse was punishment for ancestral sin, while others dismissed it as Satan's trick. Either way, faith shaped how the family understood their suffering. The role of the banshee. Irish folklore added another layer. Many locals swore they heard banshees wailing outside Murphy homes the night before a death. The banshee, in Irish tradition, is not a bringer of death, but a herald of it, a spirit who cries to announce what cannot be stopped. For the Murphys, this legend felt chillingly real, Protestant and folk beliefs. Some Protestant ministers saw the curse as divine justice. Folk healers claimed they could break it through rituals, charms, or offerings. Families tried everything, holy water, exorcisms, pilgrimages, but nothing worked. The boys still died. Spiritual meaning. For many, the curse became a symbol, a reminder of the fragility of life, a lesson in humility before forces greater than humanity. The deaths were not only tragedies, they were warnings written in blood. Faith as survival. And yet, faith also gave strength. Mothers prayed not because it broke the curse, but because it gave them peace. Fathers turned to God not for explanations, but for the courage to bury their sons. Religion did not end the curse, but it gave the Murphys the only thing left: hope. In the end, the Murphy curse lived both in the church and in the folklore. It was seen as punishment, prophecy, or proof of the supernatural. But for the Murphys themselves, faith was not about answers. It was about survival in the face of relentless loss. A family name turned into legend. The Murphy curse did not die with the sons who were buried at 21. It lived on, carried by whispers, passed through generations like an heirloom of grief. The name Murphy itself began to attract curiosity and fear. Whenever people encountered a Murphy boy approaching adulthood, questions arose. Would he make it past 21? Would history repeat itself again? The family's reputation was no longer just about individuals. It had become a story bigger than themselves, a story that attached itself to anyone who bore the name. Generations living under shadow. Even descendants who may not have suffered the curse directly still lived in its shadow. Young Murphy men of later generations grew up hearing the tale, and for many of them, their 21st birthday was not a celebration, but a countdown. Some spent that year in fear, avoiding travel, heavy labor, or even social gatherings. Others reacted the opposite way. They lived recklessly, drinking, fighting, or chasing thrills, thinking, if I will die soon, why not taste everything before it ends? The legacy was not only about death, but about how life was lived in anticipation of it. A reputation that outlived the victims. For communities around the Murphy family, the curse became part of local folklore, passed from grandparents to grandchildren like a cautionary tale. Teachers mentioned it in hushed tones. Priests recalled it in sermons about fate. Even newspapers occasionally picked it up as an odd story. In this way, the legacy stretched beyond bloodlines and became a shared cultural story. The Murphys themselves may have been exhausted by the endless speculation, but their curse had already entered history. Survival through storytelling. Ironically, though the sons kept dying, the family name never disappeared. The story itself kept the Murphys alive in memory. Every retelling was a form of survival. Instead of being forgotten, the family became immortalized through their curse. In many ways, their legacy became paradoxical. Their deaths ended young lives, but gave them a kind of eternal life in history's pages. The legacy of the Murphy curse is not just about tragedy. It is about how stories shape identity, how communities remember, and how pain can become legend. Generations later, the Murphy name is still known, not because of wealth, war, or discovery, but because of a mysterious pattern of death that left the world both horrified and fascinated. The fragility of life. If there is one lesson in the Murphy story, it is that life is uncertain. The precision of the deaths at 21 may have seemed supernatural, but in truth, it was a brutal reminder of how fragile human existence can be. We expect life to follow a natural arc: birth, childhood, adulthood, old age. Yet the Murphys never reach that final stage. Their story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that time is not guaranteed. The power of belief. Another lesson lies in psychology. Whether or not the curse was real, the belief in it shaped lives. Fear alone can weaken a heart, destroy courage, and push people toward reckless choices. The Murphys show us how powerful belief systems are. They can heal, inspire, or destroy. A curse believed is sometimes as deadly as a curse real. The dangers of stigma. The Murphy family also teaches us how cruel society can be. Rather than offering support, many communities isolated them, branding them cursed, dangerous, or unworthy of connection. This stigma only deepened the pain. The lesson here is clear. When tragedy strikes, communities must stand together, not push the victims further into darkness. Faith and endurance. Yet, amid despair, the Murphys also showed resilience. Parents who lost multiple sons still carried on, mothers still cooked meals, fathers still worked the land, families still prayed. Their endurance, even while knowing the pattern, is a lesson in strength. They remind us that even in the face of relentless loss, human beings continue to fight for life. Closing. From the Murphy family we learn that life is fragile, belief is powerful, stigma is dangerous, and resilience is possible. The curse may remain a mystery, but the lessons it left behind are real and timeless. The human urge for patterns. Humans are storytellers by nature. When something strange happens, we search for meaning. We connect dots, create explanations, and shape mysteries into myths. The Murphy curse became a myth because people could not accept meaningless tragedy. A random sequence of deaths is terrifying, but a curse gives the suffering structure, a reason, even if supernatural. Curses in culture. The Murphys are not alone. History is filled with cursed families and objects. The pharaoh's tombs of Egypt, the Kennedy family in America, even jewels like the Hope Diamond. Cultures across the world explain misfortune through curses. The Murphy story fits into this global pattern, proof that humans everywhere need explanation when faced with relentless tragedy. Supernatural as comfort. Ironically, believing in a curse can sometimes be more comforting than facing chaos. If tragedy is random, it means no one is safe. But if tragedy is the result of a curse, it feels contained. The Murphys were cursed, not everyone else. The community could feel safer by believing the danger was isolated to one family. The thin line between myth and reality. Over time, myths and reality blend. The Murphy story began with real deaths, but folklore soon wrapped around it. Were banshees really heard? Did witches really curse them? Or were these stories added later as layers of meaning placed on bare facts? The line is thin, and in that space between truth and tale, the Murphy curse grew strong. The Murphy curse reminds us of why humans create myths, to find order in chaos, to explain the unexplainable, and to give shape to suffering. Whether the curse was real or not, the myth itself became real in people's lives, shaping actions, beliefs, and memories. The story lives on. Today, centuries later, the Murphy family curse is still told. It appears in books, articles, podcasts, and YouTube videos. People remain fascinated, not because they believe in curses without question, but because the story touches universal fears, death, fate, and the possibility that some things are beyond control. Modern skepticism, ancient fears. In the modern world, most dismiss the curse as legend. Scientists point to genetics, historians to bad record-keeping, psychologists to fear. Yet, deep down, even skeptics feel a chill when they hear the story. What if it wasn't coincidence? What if some mysteries remain unsolved? The curse continues to unsettle us because it balances on the edge between science and superstition. A mirror for humanity. The Murphy story is not just about one family, it is about us all. It reflects our struggle with mortality, our hunger for meaning, and our fear of the unknown. The curse is not only a tale of death, but a mirror that forces us to look at our own fragility and our own need for answers. Lessons for the present. In the end, the curse can teach us how to live. If life can end at 21 or at any age, then every day is precious. The Murphys remind us not to waste time, not to postpone love, not to delay dreams. Their tragedy becomes our lesson. Life is uncertain, but within that uncertainty lies the urgency to live fully. And so the Murphy curse comes to us not just as history, not just as legend, but as a story that continues to echo. Whether we believe it or not, we cannot ignore it. The sons may have died at 21, but their story lives forever, whispering across time. Life is fragile. Death is mysterious, and some stories are never forgotten.